I'm Suzanne Aldrich. I'm from the customer success team at Pantheon, and I'm part of the launch team that takes care of launching many enterprise websites. And I'm here today to talk to you about the process and the tools, the tooling that we utilize to achieve the perfect launch every time. Everyone wants to have their cake and eat it too, but how? We've always been told that there's a hard and fast rule. You can have good, you can have cheap, you can have quick, but you can't have all three. In fact, attaining all three has remained as elusive as the Chicago Cubs at the World Series. In this presentation, I will introduce you to the tools and practices leading up to that famed magical region of unicorns and rainbows. Perfect launch paradise. So what exactly qualifies as a perfect launch? On time, you want to minimize the delays or the timeline adjustments. On budget, you'd want to eliminate any kind of out-of-scope coding. And on plan, you want it to be feature complete and usable. I forgot I put those transitions in there. Pantheon has the same team launching several enterprise sites per week, while assisting hundreds of self-service customers when they need a hand. But because we need to work effectively, we had to develop a system to accommodate the launches that we were seeing on a consistent basis. That's why we have the launch team. It's for onboarding. And let me introduce you to what we do as a launch team to prepare for a perfect launch. The launch team prepares for a successful launch by making it easier to coordinate all the stakeholders. Over the course of these launches, we've discovered essentially a template. Oh, backwards. We want to get rid of all the uh-oh moments that lead up to the launch day, because we often uncover things that people don't anticipate. This is very common. We want to get rid of all these uh-oh moments. We strive to empower our users to be self-sufficient. We want us to help them be successful. This reduces costs, since time is money. The key is maintaining good communication. Not too much, not too little, and always focused. By formulating an onboarding process which addresses the specific needs of the stakeholders, we set the stage for a perfect launch. We have stakeholders like the project manager. They're concerned with scheduling and best practices. We've got the developer. They're interested in knowing about our platform and integration points. The sysadmin, they're going to have to coordinate with us for DNS. And of course, we have the business owner who wants to have a perfect launch, so they want a flawless performance. For any launch, we're going to have a system and tools. It doesn't really matter which tools you use, but you should have them. These tools should have certain features in common to be able to use them across projects. You need to be able to set apart the repeatable tasks that are delegatable, so you're going to need to have some kind of task system that accommodates this, where you can share tasks in a group, in a coordinated way, and everybody knows what piece of the project has been worked on and completed. We use Write, but many companies use Jira. There are many different project management software, each of them having their own strengths and weaknesses. You're going to want to set up orientation logistics, including calendaring for the deadline and for all the various milestones. And you're going to want to set up your channels of real-time communication ahead of the launch date, certainly, and for the whole process, because you need to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And if these channels of communication aren't set up ahead of time, it can be very difficult. We use phone, we use video conferencing, we use GoToMeeting. These are all specific tools. Of course, there are many these days with real-time conferencing. In addition, it's important to have all of your documentation, your training, set up from the get-go so that everybody's on the same page and we know how this whole operation is going to run. It's very important to scope out the responsibilities so everybody has a clear idea of what part of the project they're responsible for. You have to know their lines, you have to get the stage set to reduce this confusion. Having channels of communication set up ahead of time, including emergency procedures, eliminates the kind of panic moments that can really make life so stressful when it comes up to that launch day. We prefer to utilize a primary box of our ticket system because this reduces confusion and it is easier to obtain technical info instead of stream of consciousness or emotional outbursts. It definitely helps with keeping calm for everybody involved with the project. And it's so important to stay in touch because being proactive about this helps the client identify blockers they don't even know that they have. Oftentimes, people might know that they have an issue, but they're not talking about it. But being proactive in this communication process is extremely vital. Here we have a graph of the tickets that we would receive prior to having this process and tools set up. The red line indicates the pre-launch team process where tickets would trickle in until we get a kind of, oh my god, oh no, the project is going off the rails moment, also known as developer panic. The blue line is the post-launch team process, and you'll see that we've preloaded all of the questions and training towards the front of the process, and it's really a much more smooth process to go through. Once we've got everybody oriented, we start looking at the actual project itself and utilize a system known as Launch Check. Now, Launch Check is really wonderful. It allows us to review sites prior to launching them and prior to load testing, and enables everybody to be on the same page about the configuration of the site. Since every site has a different purpose, different use case, you can't necessarily, in our kind of business, know every single aspect of a site, but we can certainly check for commonalities that are important for all Drupal websites in order to have the best performance. And with time and experience, we developed a set of recommendations that work for just about every site. So what is site audit? What is site auditing? Static site analysis is where you look at a site's or an application's configuration and code base in such a way that you don't actually execute the program. Therefore, you're avoiding the observer effect. The idea is that we don't want an intrusive check for this so that we affect the site that we're trying to check. You can download the same tool that we utilize for our site audit. It's open source. You can look at the code and evaluate if it's good for your needs. And it really helps figure out the best practices if they're actually being used and gives you a report on them. And in addition, this tool is vendor agnostic, so it's not something that you need Pantheon to run, but it is simply a Drush plugin. What can an audit analyze? Well, many, many things. You can analyze the Drupal caching settings. You can analyze the code base, the file size. You can look at the database structure, the tables, the formatting of the collation. You can look at the types of modules that are present, if they're missing, if they're duplicated, not recommended. You can analyze non-standard code structures, and these can all have an effect on the performance of the site over time, and also when you go to launch any of these items, if they're out of whack, can certainly cause a launch to go awry. In addition, we look at things like views caching and watchdog logs, which I think we'll come upon a little bit more in the load testing section, why that's so important. Here's where you can locate your site status report on Pantheon if you've got your site on our system. You just go to the login to the Pantheon dashboard, look at the site environment that you want to examine, and click status. It gives you a set of reports and red, green, or yellow color indicators to tell you the severity of the issue. So the first thing I want to talk about is Drupal caching settings, because this is such a vital portion of how to keep your site performant under real-world conditions. Anonymous page cache is used by Drupal for internal caching. This also sets headers that allows Varnish, which is a high availability reverse proxy, to cache the pages. If Drupal page caching is off, your page headers are not being set, so your site's not being cached. This means that every single time you have a visitor going to your website, they're simply going to be they're going to be hitting the back end, they're going to be utilizing the database, they're going to be executing PHP code, and you're not going to be able to handle as many people at the same time, which is why we have page caching technologies. Drupal cron is the mechanism that Drupal uses to do timed jobs, and it's very important that this is also set up because if you don't have cron running, you can end up with a lot of bad watchdog problems. You can have tables filling up, caches filling up. If cron isn't executing, parts of your site that are extremely important for functionality might not be executed. You might not be sending items to your index servers for search results. And a lot of people these days design sites that are so important to have these various jobs running. So you need to make sure that you have some kind of status check on your cron. Drupal's database, the storage engine and the collations are very important, especially the storage engine. It's really optimized for InnoDB. You do not want to have MySM because of it doesn't offer row-level locking. It's table-level locking that can really bung up a site when you're in a live production environment. Extensions, you're going to want to see that there's no duplicated ones. This can really be an issue when you're going to upgrade the site. You're not sure which code is the one that's being updated, which one is registered in the database. You might have to run registry rebuilds. And we see performance issues sometimes with this. Sometimes what will happen is somebody will update one version of the module and has dependency on another version, and everybody's really confused about which code base we're working on. So it's very important to keep these very neat and tidy. I think this is one of the most important things to cover here today because views caching is not well understood. It's not the same as Drupal page caching. Drupal page caching caches your website pages as a whole. Views caching, there's actually two mechanisms. One of them is query caching, which caches the database queries you need to get the information out of the database. Rendered output caching is kind of what it says. The output from that is being cached, so that you don't have to keep making the same, keep constructing the same queries all the time. Queries cached. You don't have to keep constructing the same results. The rendered output's cached, and this really helps with performance and especially enterprise websites. And you'll want to make sure that these are enabled for any of your public-facing views. So this is one of the things that we really highly recommend for customers when they have certain pages that might load a little more slowly. Yes?
On the views query caching, does that include pages that you have exposed filters on?
For the page, for
pages that you have exposed filters
on? For the views caching, any view whatsoever will have a query because views is constructing queries to send to the database. So this can apply even to things like even administrative views you can cache query, but I don't recommend that. Mostly for public-facing caches or views that need to be cached. The Drupal watchdog is very important to see the level of error logging you're having because every single error will have performance impact, not only in the database write, but also because being in an error condition can cause your opcode to not cache and PHP will run slower. So keep track of that. Let's see what a bad configuration can do in terms of performance. Starting with a simple Drupal 7 site, we ran 10,000 requests with Apache Bench, which is a great do-it-yourself way to go ahead and load test your application. 10,000 requests were sent to a home page, 5 at a time. We warmed the cache, we cleared the watchdog. Comparison is, the bad configuration had one PHP notice and a warning in a template. Just a simple template file having an error in it, a PHP error, created a warning and a notice. The good site had no PHP notices or warnings. The results, on the bad configuration, it took 20 minutes to handle those 10,000 requests. The good configured website, it took 10 minutes. I think it's pretty clear that you should take care of your PHP errors and warnings. They're not something that should be ignored. You shouldn't turn off watchdog just because of the database hits. That's a canary in the coal mine. And one of the #1 ways that we can improve the performance of any website is by debugging them and taking care of the errors on the back end. And then even the front end errors, having the 404s, any little thing like that, any kind of error is going to have a significant impact, especially as you get into high performance situations. Here's a new relic snapshot of that app server response time for the site with an error and after the error has been fixed. You can see the database writes are really going down because we're not writing to the watchdog anymore. And that's why people turn off the watchdog. They go, why I have so much database activity? Oh, I'll just turn off the watchdog. Well, look at your app server response time on the application side, the blue band. Look how much better it is once the error is fixed. That wouldn't have happened if you just turn off the watchdog. You would still have a big blue band. So you can see that you can dramatically increase the performance of your website just by taking care of these things. And we haven't even gotten to load testing. Once your site is past launch check, you're ready to load test. I don't even really want to test a site that doesn't pass some of these basic configuration best practices. We're going to move into this load testing phase of our journey towards a perfect launch. Now, long ago, in the early days of web dev, a load test is what happened when you got slash-dotted. Now we know that we must test and verify our application's performance prior to letting loose the hounds. With a performance load test, we measure response times, throughput, and resource utilization of a web application. And we identify the areas of the weak performance. Smoke tests are usually something that you would run when you're getting started with this. So you're just running a quick performance test as you're doing your development. And that's under normal load. Stress load tests, they show the behavior under peak load. There is a subset of this called spike tests where you're going to do this in short bursts, so it's not as sustained as the stress tests. The capacity tests are useful for helping determine for planning purposes what kind of capacity that you can actually accommodate now and what would be how many users or transactions could you have and still have a performance site. Who should execute load tests? Well, developers should load tests, but they really should involve the stakeholders because they're going to need to make the case for why the performance issues should be addressed. And that is often a function of the business operation of the website. So it's important for everybody who's involved with the launch, every stakeholder, to be involved with this. You can perform testing using do-it-yourself tools. I mentioned Apache Bench. That's something that you can run from your command line. Or you can start getting into the more complex and dynamic load testing tools that we utilize. There's Apache JMeter, and that's something that I've had demoed to me, and it looks very hard to use. But it's definitely something that you can set up on your own stations and perform. When you're getting into using a SaaS, you might want to consider something like Load Impact or Load Storm, because these allow you to set up dynamic testing situations. So you can actually, it's not just hitting the front page. Oh, how fast can we load the front page? You want to be able to design a load testing script that mimics the important functions that the users of your website are going to try to perform themselves. I really like Load Impact. It's very handy. They actually have a Chrome extension that allows you to record the path that you're following, clicking through a website, turn it into a script. You can check over the script and then execute that test very easily. When should you load test? Well, you should be load testing before you write a single line of code. And you should be utilizing all these kinds of profiling tools to see on the back end and on the front end, everywhere along the way of your application, what is going on. There's a lot of tools out there. We've listed some here. You can use things like Xdebug in development. Duvel is a great module in Drupal, but you're going to want to disable it in production. Please do not have development in production. You're going to want to utilize, of course, your logging utilities, and we like to have New Relic agents installed on our server so that people have a good idea from a visual standpoint what everything's looking like, the profile of the application, and try to perform all of our load tests while we have a New Relic window open. That way that you can see during the course of the test and verify numbers across services. So if you're doing a load test with Load Impact, you'll see their numbers, but on the side you can also have the logs, and you can have New Relic and collect all this data to help figure out what's happening and give some actionable steps forward to improving the performance. Approaching launch day, it's important to perform a full load testing regime to uncover any performance issues or regressions. And you're going to want to perform these load tests on the production environment itself in order to mimic real-world conditions. Obviously, you don't have the visitors, but we'll be doing that with the virtual users. Bandwidth may be an issue if you perform load tests from any kind of local environment, simply because your bandwidth's going to run out. So you can utilize SaaS, like Load Impact, or any other kind of service like that. That way you avoid running into your own bandwidth limitation, and you'll actually get a more accurate idea of what the throughput of the website is. What to expect during and after load testing? Well, you should expect to see, well, you shouldn't want to see, but you'll probably see messages in your logs that will help indicate things like slow database transactions, or errors, or warnings. And you're also going to see, probably if you haven't warmed your caches, you're going to see certain kinds of cache spiking activity at the beginning of the load test. You're going to want to benchmark often in order to get enough data points to really have a fundamental understanding of where your development is taking you with the performance of this site. You start at the very beginning, get a spreadsheet, make your load test, record the URL, stick some numbers in there, keep going, come back later with more numbers. You should be reasonable, though, because your back-end numbers should be dictating the expectations, not necessarily just Google Analytics. It's very important to understand that things like Google Analytics, they certainly can give you a great idea, but they're not a total X-ray into the performance of your application. They're just telling you what visitors have gone there, and they can give you analytics based on that, but they can't really tell you how much your website can handle in terms of visitors. I think it's important to go into a discussion of caching because it's so vital in the process of making a performant website to have a perfect launch. There's several layers of caching for performance enhancement available for web applications. And you should investigate and enable these caching strategies prior to testing even. You don't want to wait till after testing to enable these because you want to understand how your application will actually perform. So make all your performance adjustments prior to the testing. So the kinds of opcode caching that we have are APC, there's Zend opcache, there's Deaccelerator, and obviously you're going to want to have opcode caching. Back-end caching, there are some different choices as well. We see memcached. We use Redis. It's a great program. It allows you to very efficiently store key value pairs. And there's MongoDB. People use file system. Can't say I recommend APC for enterprise sites because it doesn't really work very well when you have multiple application servers. So you're going to want to avoid that. For front-end caching, you're going to want to enable varnish and make sure that your varnish configuration rules are compatible with Drupal. There's Squid, there's reverse proxy CDNs. A lot of us use things like Cloudflare, there's Akamai. It's important to think of these strategies. You might not necessarily load test with that, but you might want to try an A/B test, see before enabling this and after what kind of performance that you get. Of course, when you use Cloudflare, you can configure it to have domains pointing to a test or staging website and test it that way. Backend caching offloads database operations in an efficient key value store. And you should enable and load test with the backend caching. Here, we have an example of a site which operated very poorly without the benefit of Redis, but saw tremendous gains when Redis was eventually implemented. You can see there are a lot of cache table operations indicated by I think the green color. Yeah, the green is a cache page insert. There's a cache field select in blue. Once Redis was enabled at that point where the arrow is pointing, those are all gone. It's been offloaded off the database, and now the database is open for other visitors to make queries. Oh, yeah, look at the database performance. Incredible. And, the blue indicates the Redis. Redis has been engaged. Here's what happens during a load test when you don't have anonymous page caching enabled. As visitors ramp up, the site's response gets worse. You're not going to have a good time launching this website. This is a load test from Load Impact, and you see the clients active in green. You see the user load time in blue, and you would not want to see a ramping blue line. You would want to see the blue line stay flat as visitors ramp up. We offer a varnish check interface for Pantheon hosted sites, but you can examine your varnish headers for the site using curl or other browser-based debugging tools. Curl is great. It just gives it all right there. I suppose you could probably script something like that to crawl your site and find any headers you didn't like. Important headers to pay attention to, the xvarnish header. It contains the ID of the current request and the ID of the request that populated the cache. If there's only one number here, the cache was populated with the current request and should be considered a cache miss. Another very important header is the cache control that also shows the max age. That's set from Drupal's performance settings. So when you enable page caching, that sets that header, and the number 900 is 15 minutes. So you want to be caching for at least 15 minutes for anonymous users. If you see something like no cache, must revalidate, post check equals 0, pre check equals 0, this is Drupal's default header, and typically indicates something is conflicting. The age header there tells you how long the content has been stored in the cache. If it's 0, that means that it was not cached. As you reload the page, you would see this age increasing over time until it hit the maximum age of 900, 15 minutes. Use the logs, Luke. The PHP Slow Log is really one of my go-to places for finding problems with performance in Drupal websites. You can see a stack trace that will help drill down into the specific function in the specific module and the specific subsystem that instantiated this request. You can see other interesting information about the time and drill down through here, and it helps give you an idea of where you're having your main issues. But I really have to say that this is my favorite log of all time. Also the Nginx error log, that will tell you if you're running into problems with too few resources to handle the amount of activity that you're getting. So here we have an error about worker connections are not enough. And this is an indication that you're going to need more resources to handle the application or make your application more performant. MySQL Slow Log, even better almost than the PHP Slow Log. It gives you even more information about it, the specific actual query. So I highly recommend looking into these slow logs. Finally, paying attention to Watchdog. It's so vital. You get these PHP notices. You saw what happened to the websites. Just having one PHP notice, it instantly halved the performance of the website. Here's an example of a good load test. A good load test is one where as visitors ramp up, as requests, in this case the green line indicates the requests per second. They are increasing as the visitors are increasing and visiting different pages and grabbing resources from the pages that they're visiting. The blue line indicates the user load time for the user. At first you'll see, I probably didn't warm the caches enough, so the initial load times are a little on the higher end of 8 seconds, because it takes a little time for caches to get all the stuff that they need to be able to serve them properly to visitors. But you can see that over time, it stayed pretty steady. You want to keep it as flat as possible, and that really indicates that you have a performance site. This is what it looks like when you have a bad load test. This website, I'm not even really sure what they were doing, but as the requests ramped up, I think they had 404s, literally just like a 1 or 2 style 404s, because they were aggregating. They had some strange way of aggregating the assets, and they didn't manage to get it over in time for the load test. So I started this load test, and the site really had all the stuff wrong with it. It looked beautiful, but it really, on the back end, was not operating very well. We had some caching issues. They had a custom cache with their form, and basically every single time one request went in, it like generated 6 requests or something like that. Mm-hmm. It was a little difficult to suss out, but you don't want to have something like that. Of course, I think the worst one was the one with the no page caching, because then the blue line travels along with the green line, and it's proportionately growing, and that's exactly what you don't want. You want to have something that's a linear function.
Is this with load test or that tool that you?
Yeah, load impact.
Load impact.
Mm-hmm. They allow you to make all these wonderful graphs to compare the bandwidth served, the number of users, and the response times for these users. So, and then you can drill down a little bit more, get access to maximum page load times for specific portions of the site. Once you've got the hard numbers and logs, it's time to make a case for the business impact of any performance issues uncovered. You need to find out what is the worst performing part of the site that has the most business context. So, for example, product page views. A lot of times people design these very beautiful product page views, but they haven't enabled any caching for any of the view. And it's a slightly obscure setting because you have to click through about 5 pages of screens in Views UI to find it. But once you actually locate this little setting and you enable it, you would be surprised about the increase in performance. And I think that if you can make a case where you link the performance of especially certain sections of the site to the specific business needs of the stakeholders of the site, it can be incredible, the performance that you can achieve when you link together those two. Because once people understand how important it is to be performant and the kinds of things you'll need to do to design the right kind of view, then they're more willing to put the extra time into the testing and the development of that. And in the case of views caching, it's easy. All you have to do is check a couple little boxes, a little radio button here or there, and you end up having a much better performing product page. So it's important to link these numbers together for the stakeholders so they understand what the stakes are for their site on launch day. And that brings us to on launch day. You're going to own those results. And here's our unicorn on the perfect launch. We've reached that famed land of unicorns and rainbows. Take the time to learn about your application's performance, because launch day is coming and we want to make it perfect. Thank you so much for attending. Please ask me questions. I would like to have anything that you have. Please let me know what you want to know about. Yes, Cal?
Which opcode cache would you recommend?
I think APC.
Do you guys run under non-PHP or FastCGI?
I think we're using not FastCGI, but PHP FPM.
Okay. I didn't even give that as an option, but I've heard of it.
Do you know exactly where the views caching options are in views?
Yes, let me go and find that. I can find that. If you come over here, I'll find it. I wanted to add that to the slideshow, but I couldn't find the right place in there. If you have a suggestion about where I should stick that, I think that'd be good. But the option is, if you have to go to Advanced, you go to Edit the View, you go to the Advanced area, which is on the right column of the view. There's a little triangle, and you click that triangle to find this enormous section of completely and utterly vital parts of your view. Then there is a single word that says caching, and that's about 3/4 of the way down that column. So not at the top where it's important, but no, 3/4 of the way down. I really think that I'm going to introduce a patch to views that makes that blink.
Well, there's views bully, views cache bully, right?
Views
so,
cache bully is wonderful. I definitely say if you've got a lot of views and you don't want to go through that process over and over and over and over again, use views cache fully. If you do, because you might have administrative views that you're concerned about content editors, because they're very picky about seeing their content showing right away. God forbid you cache any kind of editor's content because they freak out and open tickets. But performance and dynamic websites are a balancing act. You make something more performant, but it's not going to be as dynamic. You make something as dynamic, it's not going to be as performant. And that's another thing that you have to make a case for business owners, because they don't necessarily understand this concept, but if you can kind of show them the scales of performance versus dynamic, freshly updated content, I think it's important, because nobody wants to be Esurance and have the Super Bowl ad and go down as soon as somebody, have your Super Bowl ad be your load test. That's not what we want. That's not what we want. Make a Super Bowl, yeah.
In that, I've seen that caching, but I can't remember, does it split out the SQL and the output?
Yeah, it's a multi-form kind of a thing. So the first time you go through it, you've picked the query, the SQL query, you pick if it's time-based or not, and then that's where you set the time, and then you keep going through the dialog and get to the rendered output caching. Okay. It's one of the most obscure yet important settings in all of Drupal.
So, if it's so important, why would it ever be turned off?
Because content editors want to see their content updated right away, and because I think that I really think that's probably the reason. I mean, we can go and look in the issue queue, but they don't necessarily put all of their reasonings for why they designed the interface the way they did. It is a big dashboard that views UI. And by the way, please don't have views UI enabled on a live production website. You should not be editing views on a live production website. People will even go up to launch day trying to edit their views. No. You want to have all of your views, all of your content, all your slideshows, all your content ready for launch day, ready for load testing. Because if you load test a site that's not the same as the one you launch, it's not the same load test. It's a science here. So it's very important to understand that you should have all of the content, all the performance settings, completely like you're going to have it on launch day. And this is our dress rehearsal. And once you actually get out there, you're going to be really pleased with how the website performs once you have the numbers and you've verified that indeed you're not going to just fall over as soon as you send out your first email about the launch. Yeah.
I would add turn off all your UIs, feeds UI, fields UI,
feeds UI,
DS UI, context UI.
Devel.
The reason for caching being optional on views is obvious. A lot of times the front page may have 1 or 12 separate views, and you don't want your front page cached and dynamically in that respect. Often you don't want that. Also, like sidebar comment, like recent comments, recent this, recent that. The word recent ceases to be recent if you're aggressively caching that view.
Right.
So therefore, we need to pick and choose individually which views we do and don't want to cache. And that's not a cumbersome thing. It's not a bug. It's a feature.
It's a trade-off. It's a trade-off.
It's a trade-off.
Yeah.
Hey, what's a good formula to see how many users I should load test?
That's a really good idea. What you want to do is you try to figure out from your Google Analytics how many people are concurrently visiting your website. And let me see, I actually have a formula. I have it on here. Oh, I don't. Basically what it is you take the number of hourly visitors and then you divide that out into how long each of those visitors is visiting the website for. And your estimate's like 3 minutes. So number of visitors times 3 minutes, you take your hourly visitors divided by that, and then you end up with your number of concurrent visitors at a time.
Is that enough, or do you want to double it?
Yeah, you definitely might want to go over that. I mean, it's going to kind of depend on what you expect for launch day, and it's a little dependent on, is this an existing site? Do you have an idea from Google Analytics? And if you don't have any kind of Google Analytics, it's probably a good idea. I mean, I just, as a default, go 100 people at a time. Let's just see what happens when 100 people hit the website, and then ramp up to that. And you'll see as most problems seem to show up as you have that quantity increase. However, I will say that some situations won't show any problems unless you're doing a sustained test over time because of race conditions or the way that data is being handled and tables are being handled. You might end up having to circle around and do tests that are more sustained over time involving more authenticated users than necessarily anonymous users, because anonymous use cases don't usually have a lot of data, back towards the application.